Hello, my name's Charlie Clutterbuck and I used to farm on this land. Now I want to take you on a quick tour of the countryside, far from the madding crowd, in order to show what is going on, but also as a way of showing you how we could be growing a lot more food in this country. We're going to go back 400 years to the times of the Pendle Witches trial. The hill behind me, that's Pendle, and the trial focused on 12 wretches, not witches, who were brought along this road here to their deaths. Many people talk about, funny goings on, but actually a lot of it was to do with the land. This was the time of the enclosures, and most famously, John Townley enclosed large areas around Burnley and threw various characters off the land who were squatting there, one of which was James Device, the grandson of Elizabeth Device. And he dug up some lawn at Carr Hall, which was owned by Mrs. Townley. It was his little bit of revenge, but it cost him his life because his younger sister, 9-year-old Jeanette, gave evidence that he mumbled witches' curses while he was digging up the divots. And talking of enclosures, these two fields here were enclosed in 1621. And I happen to know that because I used to live on the farm just there. And that's telling us something else as well, that in the 1830s, investment came in from industry onto the land. So lots of merchants wanted to wed lots of lasses on the land. But at the same time, there was a massive conflict going on between industry and the landowners. The industrialists wanted to feed their workers cheaply. The landowners wanted to stop food coming in from abroad, cheap food from the colonies. And that's what's led to the repeal of the Corn Laws, which we may still be learning about at school. The consequence of that was that over the next 100 years, the amount of food produced in this country declined dramatically, so that by the start of the First World War, we produced only a quarter of our own food. Out of the clutches of the US Marshall Plan, which gave food with loads of strings attached, the government wanted to produce much more food ourselves. So invested in drains, chemicals, machinery, advice, but almost more so research. When I was brought up, we had 32 research stations looking at soil and weeds and all sorts. There was also a consensus between the two main parties that farmers should be guaranteed prices for their food, and each year they'd debate in Parliament how much they would get for producing bread and potatoes. So that by the mid-70s we produced 3/4 of our own food. And then in the 80s along came Margaret Thatcher, and her motto was let the markets rule, i.e. let the supermarkets rule, because the government took less and less interest. She flogged off perhaps the best research station in the country, the Plant Breeding Institute. She flogged it to Unilever, who sold it on to Monsanto. And 3/4 of the research stations disappeared in the next 30 years. So that by the end of her reign, we were producing only 60% of the food we eat. So the issue is this reliance on markets, because what happens is people say, produce more food, produce more food. But what happens in a market system is the price of that food then goes down. A good harvest means bad prices, a bad harvest means good prices, and yet we rely on the markets time and time again. We have to intervene, have government support, and invest in the produce we want, particularly fruit and vegetables, but also grain and meat, in order to meet the needs of this country without destroying the rest of the world. And 10 years ago, we were being urged to leave the EU. And one of the reasons being put forward was we could get our hands on the £3 billion worth of subsidies given to farmers. It amounted to about £100 an acre and was a bit silly because it didn't actually pay to do anything. But it was a good bedrock for the small farmers. And in fact, just down the road at Gisborne, Boris Johnson promised the farmers that the subsidies were guaranteed 100%. And then in his first government, guess what? He gets rid of them. So since then, we've been trying to work out what's happened to those subsidies. And it seems that the big landowners, if you happen to have a spare 1,000 acres, can get their hands on about £1 billion worth of them for rewilding, which, remember, doesn't grow any food. The rest, it seems very difficult to find out what's happened. Certainly small farmers seem to have got bits and pieces for growing flowers and walls and stuff. But on the other hand, I think the consultants have made quite a lot of money about advising farmers. So in the direction now seems to be towards carbon counting, and that is all to do with carbon offsets, that you can still carry on polluting, but if you grow a few trees then that balances out. And this is called net zero. And I'm now beginning to say that net zero fiddles while the earth burns, but that's another story. I'm here in Clitheroe, Lancashire, which is one of 250 transition towns in the country. These are areas where enthusiastic people have got together to try and find ways to reduce their impacts on the environment, particularly to do with fossil fuels and climate change, but also to encourage people to grow more food locally and thus be less dependent on the rest of the world. I'm here on the allotments, but even here it takes 2 years on the waiting list to be able to access one of these plots. According to the Royal Society, we only produce about 50% of all the food we eat. And that 50% has a disproportionate effect in terms of land. It means that 70% of the land used to produce our food is abroad. Only 30% is in this country. So South America in particular, but also Europe, they provide another third, and then the rest of the world provide the final third. They also reckon that it has a disproportionate effect on the carbon dioxide and the greenhouse gases, that most of those that produce our food, nearly 2/3, is abroad, not in this country. And yet we seem to ignore this. And the final one, which we won't talk much about because it's still raining, is the amount of water used to produce the food we eat in this country. It's hard to get a figure, but to give you an idea, there are 22 Niles worth, the River Niles worth of water used in Africa to ship food to Europe and Britain included. So we are using everybody else's water as well, even though we're not short of water ourselves. And if you think that was bad enough, that diagram was from 2009, and since then things have got quite a lot worse, mainly because we're now importing a lot more ultra-processed foods. Many of you will know that ultra-processed foods seem to be contributing dramatically to the increase in obesity, particularly in this country, which is just about the most obese in Europe, as now 50% of the food we eat is ultra-processed food. And this is the stuff I'm talking about, these glossy things we all love to eat. But when you start looking at the labels, you realise what they're made of. And this seemingly healthy eat natural consists of soya protein, more soya, soya again. You think, what's soya doing in these products? The most important ultra-processed foods are soya, palm, cornstarch, raw cane sugar and wheat flour. And the first 4 of those are all imported completely. We don't grow any soya, any palm oil or cane sugar. And I don't know how much wheat flour from Britain is being used in these ultra-processed foods, but what we can now say is 50% of the food we eat in this country is imported. And what's really curious is that this seems to be going to increase because since Brexit, 3 of those foods have had the tariffs removed from imports. Maize, the maize tariff has been removed. The tariff on palm oil has been removed with a deal with the Pacific. The most important one is the removal of the tariff on raw cane sugar. The first 250,000 tonnes can now come into the country without a tariff, and that was set the very day after Brexit was implemented. So we're opening ourselves now to the world for more ultra-processed foods, and we call them processed foods because they're processed from the field through the factory right to the service. And what they do is keep chopping it up and grinding it, because as a commodity, an apple or grain or what, it's got water in, and that's heavy and that costs. So they're finding the cheapest way to get the food into this country, and that's why it's ultra processed. This will continue, so we're going to import more food in the future rather than less. I'm here at the pantry in Accrington in Hyndburn, and this is a fabulous shop that is on the main street so that people can just wander in and buy what is good, healthy food, which has been subsidised so that they don't have to pay silly prices for that healthy food.
So we set up the pantry in 2021. It was just after COVID, and what we did a lot of research during COVID around when we were delivering the food parcels to the shielding and to the vulnerable people. We found that there was a lot coming back, a lot of waste, and so we did a lot of research to say, right, is there still a need that post-COVID, because obviously families were still not back at work, there was a lot of furlough still going on, so we needed to provide food to a lot of the residents in the town. So we were very lucky, we was given a donation to set up possibly a new food bank, but we decided from research that we'd open up a pantry style model. Now a pantry is a little bit different because you come and you select the food that you want. You don't get given the food as a parcel, you come in and you shop like a little supermarket. So that's obviously why we're set up as we are now. So we have to apply for grants a lot of the time. We do have the Household Support Fund, which the government run, which a lot of food pantries and food banks are supported nationally by. We work with Feeding Britain, who are an excellent organisation who do help us, and we help them by feeding in to them what happens, what's happening in the current climate, the ideas that our customers might have. So we all work together to make sure that although we're in Hyndburn and support Hyndburn residents, we feed in nationally to a lot of the policies that the government have. And we do lots of other things as well. We do like cooking recipes for how you can do low cost meals. We work with different organisations such as Co-op, they give us recipe cards. We've done training sessions to show people how to cook affordable meals with slow cookers. We've had a grant in to provide baby blenders to get new families, new mums and dads, to show them how they can cook baby food by using your own food and then blending it so that you don't have to rely on expensive jars and packets of food. But we want to catch everybody for a very young age, and we have a lot of families that come in. So whilst we do have everything like a small supermarket, the difference is the fruit and vegetable is given as a freebie, and it's there to stock up the diet. I mean, years and years ago, like, families would learn to cook from the parents and the grandparents, but now times have changed and we have to realise that, and it's a lot of fast food and a lot of quick food, and families are really, really busy. So it's not just about not having the money, it's about the time that it takes. So it's showing them as well that you can cook food very quickly, but with fresh, healthy ingredients.
Since the 1990s, when the first food guidelines were produced, there's been over a dozen government strategies with hundreds of various policies, and yet obesity has just risen and risen inexorably. Just last week, the government produced another policy, didn't they, about supermarkets encouraging people to eat healthier food. It's called a nudge policy. It's a sort of little nudge. Whereas I suspect it needs a big kick up the rear, really, because we need to start doing something along the lines which you've developed. Well, I don't think the government has accepted that healthy food costs more. There's no getting around this.
That's true.
And the Food Foundation, for instance, they reckon a normal weekly shop of healthy food is twice as much as a shop full of junk. So I think we've got to persuade the government that they've got to start really putting money in and not expecting everybody else to nudge it a bit. If you like, to have a model of the pantry nationwide, why not? And it will cost a lot of money. But this is the thing. that if you think this is a bit of a radical idea, a bit off the wall, then I would suggest we look at America, believe it or not,
Yeah.
where they put $50 billion to 40 million poorer people. It's called the SNAP scheme. And what it means is that poorer people in America can do exactly what you're doing here, can come in, choose what they want to eat, learn how to cook better. There's education programs in order to do it. So I think, and it's curious, both the Republicans and Democrats are totally agreed on this,
Good.
because
Good. Yeah.
the Republicans, it's the farmers' benefit. They've got something where to sell, and the Democrats like it because it's poorer people being looked after better. So I want to propose that this government adopts a scheme like SNAP, subsidises healthy food so that people are able to buy healthy food. This new government policy noticeably omits ultra-processed foods. Some people think that you find ultra-processed foods in tins. You don't. Tins are actually very good at preserving food. And it was a character called Napoleon Bonaparte who actually invented tins so that his armies could literally march on the stomachs.
Frozen foods are a good thing because they provide all the nutrients and the vitamins because they're frozen at source. So it keeps a lot of the goodness in them.
Whereas processed foods are mangled and pulverised at every step in the way from the fields, you know, thousands of miles away on the ships. And in order, what it's about is trying to make the carriage of food as cheap as possible. That's why it's cheap in the shops. You remember we said that 50% of our food energy now in this country comes from ultra-processed foods, and that virtually all of that comes from somewhere around the world. But where does it end up? Well, it doesn't end up in tins or in frozen foods, but most of it ends up in takeaways. Lots of these takeaways use ultra-processed food because it's cheap, it's manipulative, it can be made tasty. However, here you'll see that in a lot of northern towns, there are streets full of takeaways, and you can almost guess the poverty by the number of takeaways. In Lancashire, there are something like 1,400 takeaways throughout the county, and it seems that about half of them are in the poorest 20%. The richest 20% only have 5% of the takeaways. So it's predominantly in poor areas you get the takeaways. The same Lancashire report also tracked the obesity of children going into primary school and into secondary schools. And there is a strong correlation between the number of takeaways and the amount of obesity amongst children in these areas. That is what the frightening prospect is of these takeaways creating an obesity disorder which is going to last generations. When I was growing up after the war, my mum, like many others, would have stayed at home to cook us wholesome meals, while the breadwinner of the house was out at work, who, at the midday break, would sit down to have a subsidised meal, usually subsidised by their employers, and chat with their mates, and generally have a better time. But since the 1990s, as the breadwinners couldn't win as much, women had to go out to work, so that in came pre-prepared meals, packed lunches, etc., and out went the midday break, usually without any fight at all. So nowadays we graze our desks and we move from place to place, eating on the move. Literally, we are munching on the move. So here we are in Todmorden on the incredible farm, which Nick here has been running for at least 15 years. And how much do you think you produce on this acre here?
Well, I can't tell you what we produce, but I can tell you that we sell about a tonne a year.
A tonne?
A tonne.
Against this backdrop, look, of virtually barren, uncultivated land. This is what is called marginal. So you can produce a tonne of food which is sold for salads, fruit.
It's, to be honest, about half of it is salad. and the rest of it is things like tomatoes. We tend to grow things that are heavy because you get paid by the kilo. So beetroot is a good one. Tomatoes are full of water. Heavy stuff, yeah.
Well, it's good that the heavy stuff is grown locally, actually, instead of shipping water.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Just to sort of a bit of a plug, when I wrote this book called Bittersweet Brexit, the sweet bit was meant to imply that we would produce more food as a result of Brexit in this country. Many allotmenteers with their St George's flags thought that, but unfortunately it hasn't transpired. In the book I tried to work out how much we could save the economy by growing more food, and the top contender is fruit. If we grow more fruit, we're not only healthy, but we save a lot more money from abroad. And top of the list is grapes, because a lot of wine comes into the country, very expensive, very heavy, and we could save $500 million on that alone. And then there's the top fruits. Do you grow top fruits here?
Well, top fruit, cherries, apples,
Pears,
pears, yeah.
plums?
Yeah, we're
Right.
working on them. Take a while for the fruit trees to grow, but we're getting there.
And they would be the next best thing to go for in terms of health, the environment and saving money. So the other food commodity which we could save a lot of money on is to increase the production of cheese in this country and reduce our imports of it. I'm at a primary school in Todmorden, and look who's over here. It's Mike, one of the main workers from the Incredible Farm. Hello, Mike.
Nice to meet you, Charlie.
Question for you. You look after the youngsters here. What do they get out of what you're doing? What is it you're trying to teach them?
So I'm trying to create a rich ecology of different plants and animals, and I want them to interact with it. I'm trying to create like a forager's mindset. So there's lots of berries, lots of herbs, and I just want them to interact with them plants. It could be that they harvest in seed, it could be that they harvest in fruit, and we just do the full cycle. So we're often, for example, today, we're back at midsummer and we've been harvesting potatoes, and then we went on to cook the potatoes with the children.
Fabulous. And you said about harvesting seeds. What do you do with them?
So we're collecting them. I'm trying to demonstrate that there's a life cycle to the plants, so the children see them from the beginning. We're collecting the seeds, we're drying the seeds, we're planting the seeds, we're harvesting the crops, and then we're washing or preparing the crops ready for the kitchen.
Because aren't they incredibly valuable little particles, those seeds? If there's a bit of electronics, we'd marvel at the amount of information and how well protected it is. Yeah. But yourself, what have you learned while you've been doing that?
The biggest thing I've learned is patience. So it's taken a long time. This was originally a school car park, and we've transformed it into a garden by using the materials on site. So we recycle all of the children's fruit, we collect all the cardboard, and this becomes the organic matter for the beds.
Because I have to say, the standard of this soil is fabulous. How have you got it that good after car park?
This is about 5 years old. We've got lots of worms and organic matter, and it's just a continuous layering. So we've just harvested beans out of this bed a week ago. We then fenced it off, trampled it down. The ducks come in, the chickens come in, they eat the bugs and the grubs, they eat some of the plant matter, they do their pooping. That adds to the soil fertility, and then we get all the cardboard out of the school bin and then suppress the weeds with the cardboard. By the time the cardboard's breaking down, the weeds and everything like that have died, and then we're ready to start the next process again, planting up from seed.
And we've been doing that for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Except we seem to have forgotten how to do it most of the time. And I have a big concern that with all the concrete and tarmac around, we're actually killing the soil, because that's aerated, isn't it?
Yes.
There's air in that.
Yeah, exactly.
Underneath that, it's just being killed. It just can't breathe, the soil.
And the easiest way we've done that is by adding lots of organic matter like the cardboard. We get regular deliveries of wood chip, which the kid will dig through. They'll observe it going through the composting process because it heats up really, really fast. And then we add it to the beds and around the fruit trees. It's mainly perennial crops in here, so that over time it becomes more and more abundant. And again, there's lots of interaction with the plants, lots of smelling, lots of herbs, lots of picking the fruit.
Probably the best resource we've got in this country is our soil. Just put your hand in some of this and smell it. This is healthy soil. We've come to start using that term because it conveys the idea that it can be ill or well. This is well, this is really good. The trouble is we tend to ignore this, so that in this country we take it for granted. And here this picture shows what happens after the rain. On the west of the country, the soil comes off the moors as peat and silts up the rivers into the Irish Sea. On the other side of the country, the east, we lose about 2 million tonnes of soil each year into the North Sea. And as you can see, this isn't the dark soil, this is the lighter soil, this is our best soil, this is grade 1 and grade 2, and we're literally washing 2 million tonnes of it away each year. And to give you an idea of what a tonne of soil means, if there's a cubic metre of soil like that, that's about 1.5 tonnes. And it's really, imagine 1.5 tonnes of medium-sized whale crushed into that area. That's the amount of life in that 1.5 tonnes. And we're just eroding our best soil into the North Sea. When we produce more food in this country, we have to do it much better. We need to use a process called regenerative farming, which looks after the soil and encourages the fungi and the life to help the plants grow. Thank you very much for accompanying me on this journey through the northwest of England, from Pendle down to Stoodley, where we started 400 years ago when we looked at the land ownership and how that came about, and that still determines the landscape to this day. Then a couple of hundred years later, the industrialists came along and wanted to feed their workers with cheap food. So they started importing loads of food, so that by the First World War, we only produced 1/4 of our own food. After the Second World War, there was a consensus that we should produce more. And so by the mid-1970s, we produced 3/4 of our food. But then along came Margaret Thatcher and said, oh no, we don't want a consensus, we want to leave it to the markets. And so that's what's happened since, so that now we produce about 1/2 of our own food. And in the process, that has had dramatic environmental impacts across the world. We saw that something like 2/3 of the land needed to grow our food is abroad. Similarly, about 2/3 of the greenhouse gases produced by our food production occurs abroad. And similarly, we have to point out that obesity since the 1990s has risen inexorably. Despite dozens of government policies and strategies, it continues to do so. So this is why I've made the following proposal, that the government should provide subsidies about the same amount that the EU used to pay us on enabling poorer people to buy healthier food. Now I call this seed funding because it does exactly that. It grows a green economy. Local economies benefit because there's more circulation of money between the farms and the food. The industry, the green industry, can grow too. As we eat away at the £40 billion worth of food that's being imported, we can grow our economies much better. Our unions can call for green jobs because these provide better, decent conditions than we've seen before. In order to do all this, we need that seed funding to bring in the money to grow the green economy, which is what everybody talks about. In that way, we can take control of our food production instead of leaving it to the mad markets. And in that way, we may be able to cope better with the future, particularly climate change and world conflicts.